I was 67 when my son sent a text that changed everything. He did not ask if I could host Thanksgiving for 30 people. He informed me that I already was. That message hurt more than he knew, but the real wound came days later when I discovered a plan my own family had been hiding behind: smiles, holiday decorations, and polite concern. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, they thought they were gathering for dinner. They had no idea the truth was waiting at the table. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Harper, and at 67 years old, I believed I understood the difference between generosity and sacrifice. Looking back now, I realize I spent years confusing the two. On the morning this story truly began, I was standing on the back porch of my small house on Kiowa Island, watching the Atlantic Ocean roll towards shore in slow gray waves. November had settled over the South Carolina coast, bringing cool air and quiet skies. The tourists were gone. The beaches were nearly empty. Most mornings, I welcomed that silence. Retirement suited me better than I had expected. After 4 decades of building a successful interior design company alongside my husband, Thomas Harper, I had earned the right to slow down. At least that was what everyone kept telling me. Thomas and I had started with a tiny office in downtown Charleston. We had 1 employee, a borrowed desk, and more determination than money. Over the years, that little office became one of the most respected luxury design firms in the region. We designed waterfront estates, historic renovations, and private resorts across South Carolina. It was never easy, but it was ours. When Thomas passed away 6 years earlier, a part of me left with him. The large family home along the Ashley River suddenly felt too quiet. Every room carried memories. Every hallway reminded me of footsteps that no longer echoed there. Eventually, I began spending more time at Kiowa Island, where the ocean made loneliness feel a little smaller. That decision opened the door for my son Ryan. Ryan was my only child. For most of his life, he had been the center of my world. I had watched him grow from a curious little boy into a confident businessman. When he married Vanessa and started a family of his own, I felt proud of the life he was building. 7 years earlier, when Ryan's business hit a rough patch, I offered him and his family a place to stay. What began as a temporary arrangement quietly became permanent. Ryan, Vanessa, Sophie, and Noah moved into the Ashley River house. I told them to stay as long as they needed. I never charged rent. I never asked for utilities. Every year, I continued paying the property taxes myself. I paid the insurance premiums. When the roof needed repairs, I covered the bill. When the air conditioning system failed one summer, I wrote the check. I never mentioned any of it. Part of that came from my own childhood. My father had used money as leverage. Every favor carried strings attached. Every gift became a future obligation. I promised myself I would never treat my own child that way. So I went too far in the opposite direction. I gave without limits. I asked for nothing, and little by little, the boundaries disappeared. The house was still legally mine, but over time Ryan began speaking about it differently. He referred to renovations as decisions he had made. He invited guests without asking. He made plans involving the property as though ownership had quietly transferred without paperwork. Each incident felt small. Too small to argue about. Too small to risk family peace. So I ignored them. The truth was simple. I loved my son. I adored my grandchildren. Sophie and Noah were the brightest parts of my week. Every sacrifice felt worth it if it helped them feel secure. Standing on that porch overlooking the ocean, I still believed family was stronger than paperwork and deeper than property lines. I had no idea that in just a few days, a single text message would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving began like any other quiet morning on Kiowa Island. I woke before sunrise, brewed a cup of coffee, and carried it out to the porch overlooking the dunes. The sky was painted in soft shades of gray and pale gold. The ocean moved with the same steady rhythm it had followed long before any of us arrived and would continue long after we were gone. I had planned to stay on the island through the weekend and return to Charleston on Monday. The schedule was simple, peaceful, and exactly what I wanted. At 67, I had finally learned to appreciate empty calendars, or at least I thought I had. My phone vibrated against the arm of the chair beside me. At first, I ignored it. Family group messages had a way of multiplying overnight. Someone would share photographs, someone else would discuss recipes, and before long, there would be dozens of notifications waiting to be read. A second vibration followed. Then a third. I picked up the phone and opened the family group chat. Ryan's message sat at the top. 30 people are coming for Thanksgiving. You are hosting. I stared at the screen. Then I read it again. The wording felt strange. Not because 30 people were coming. Our family had always gathered in large numbers for holidays. That part was normal. It was the certainty that caught my attention. There was no question, no request, no discussion, just a decision that had apparently already been made. A few seconds later, Vanessa added a cheerful Thanksgiving image filled with pumpkins and autumn leaves. Several relatives responded immediately. One cousin wrote about how wonderful Evelyn's Thanksgiving dinners always were. Another commented that nobody could host a holiday gathering like I could. Someone else said they were already looking forward to seeing everyone. The conversation moved forward as though my participation had already been secured. As though I had already agreed. I set the phone down and looked back toward the ocean. A strange heaviness settled into my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something sadder. Over the years, I had hosted countless family gatherings, birthdays, Christmas dinners, graduation celebrations, baby showers, anniversary parties. I remembered spending entire days in kitchens while everyone else laughed in living rooms. I remembered carrying trays, washing dishes, setting tables, and making certain every guest felt welcomed. At the time, I called it love. Perhaps most of it was. But sitting there that morning, I began wondering how much of it had slowly become expectation. People grow accustomed to reliability. If you always say yes, eventually they stop asking. They simply assume. I thought about Sophie and Noah. The children loved Thanksgiving. The last thing I wanted was family drama spilling into their holiday memories. I also knew that arguing in a group chat would solve nothing. So I took my time. I read Ryan's message one final time. Then I typed a response. Then you had better hire professionals. I will be at Kiowa until Monday. I pressed send. For a moment, the group chat became completely silent. No reactions, no explanations, no objections, nothing. The silence lasted long enough to feel unnatural. I had spent decades reading people. This did not feel like disappointment. It felt like surprise, as though a conversation had suddenly moved somewhere I could not see. That afternoon, I drove along the island roads hoping the feeling would fade. It did not. Later, an older relative called unexpectedly. The conversation began politely enough, but quickly turned strange. Questions appeared one after another. Was I feeling well? Was I remembering important dates? Was living alone becoming difficult? The concern sounded rehearsed. Then came the comment that stayed with me. Ryan worries about you all the time. After we hung up, I sat alone beside the window overlooking the darkening shoreline. The morning text kept replaying in my mind. For the first time, I found myself asking a question I had never considered before. When had my son started making decisions for me instead of with me? The next morning, I would receive a phone call that began answering that question, and I would not like the answer. I woke up on Wednesday morning with the same uneasy feeling that had followed me to bed the night before. The ocean outside my bedroom window looked calm, but my thoughts were not. The strange questions from my relative kept replaying in my mind. Her concern had felt rehearsed, as though she had been repeating information she heard from someone else. I tried to dismiss it. Families gossip. People worry. Sometimes they imagine problems where none exist. Still, something felt wrong. I carried my breakfast to the kitchen table and opened a book I had been reading earlier that week. I made it through half a page before my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an event coordinator with a luxury event management company in Charleston. Her voice was professional and pleasant. She explained that her firm had been hired to provide catering, staff, decorations, and service for a Thanksgiving gathering scheduled for the following week. The address she mentioned was my house on the Ashley River. My stomach tightened. The coordinator explained that the reservation had been placed by Ryan Harper for 30 guests. Everything had been prepared. Deposits had been submitted. Staff schedules had been assigned. Then she hesitated. That hesitation told me the real reason she had called. The company performed ownership verification before hosting large private events. During that process, they discovered that the property's legal owner did not match the individual who had signed the booking documents. Ryan had identified himself as the homeowner. County records identified me. The coordinator politely explained that the file could not move forward without authorization from the legal property owner. For several seconds, I simply listened. The situation should have been easy to explain. Ryan lived there. He probably assumed it would not matter. Yet something about the entire arrangement bothered me, not because of the party, because of the assumption behind it. My son had not merely invited guests, he had presented himself as the owner of a house that did not belong to him. I thanked the coordinator and told her I would review the situation before making a decision. She sounded relieved and promised to hold the file until she heard from me again. After the call ended, I remained seated at the kitchen table. Memories surfaced one after another. Ryan approving landscaping projects without consulting me. Ryan hosting business dinners at the house. Ryan introducing the property to clients as our place. At the time, I had ignored those moments. Now they felt different. Now they looked like pieces of a larger picture. Later that morning, I logged into Charleston County's online property records system. The information appeared exactly as I expected. Owner, Evelyn Harper. Property taxes, paid by Evelyn Harper. Insurance policy, Evelyn Harper. Nothing had changed. Legally, the house was still entirely mine. The confirmation should have reassured me. Instead, it left me feeling strangely hurt. The paperwork had remained the same. Somewhere along the way, Ryan's understanding of it had not. Shortly after lunch, another surprise arrived. An email appeared in my inbox from someone whose name I vaguely recognized. The sender identified himself as an accountant who had previously worked with Ryan's business ventures. The message was brief. He was attempting to verify the mailing address for a company called Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company. The listed business address was my Ashley River property. I stared at the screen. I had never heard of the company. I had never authorized the use of my address. I continued reading. Several references appeared regarding outstanding obligations, unresolved tax notices, and pending financial documentation. The words seemed to blur together. I read the message twice, then a third time. A cold realization settled over me. Ryan was not simply acting like the house belonged to him. He was using it for purposes I knew nothing about. I walked to the window and watched the waves roll across the shoreline below. The Thanksgiving dinner suddenly seemed much less important. For the first time, I wondered if the holiday gathering was not the problem at all. Perhaps it was only the visible part of something much larger hiding underneath. And before the day was over, Vanessa would accidentally reveal just how large that hidden problem truly was. The rest of Wednesday passed beneath a cloud of questions I could not answer. I sat at my kitchen table on Kiowa Island, staring at the email about Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company. Every time I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, another detail pulled me back toward doubt. Maybe Ryan had simply forgotten to mention the company. Maybe the business address had been a temporary convenience. Maybe the financial notices were routine paperwork. I wanted to believe those things. A mother spends a lifetime giving her child the benefit of the doubt. That habit does not disappear overnight. By late afternoon, I had almost convinced myself to wait until Thanksgiving and ask Ryan directly. Then my phone vibrated. A new message appeared in the family group chat. The sender was Vanessa. At first, I barely glanced at it. I assumed it was another holiday update, perhaps a grocery list or a discussion about desserts. Instead, I saw an attached document. The file name meant nothing to me. Curious, I opened it. The moment I began reading, the room seemed to tilt. It was not a Thanksgiving document. It was an email chain. The participants included Ryan, Vanessa, and several relatives whose names I recognized immediately. The first few lines were enough to make my heart pound. They were discussing a family meeting planned for Thanksgiving Day, not after Thanksgiving, not sometime in the future, Thanksgiving itself. And the subject of that meeting was me. I kept reading. The messages described concerns about my ability to manage finances and property. They discussed presenting information to family members before speaking to me directly. They referenced prepared paperwork. They outlined talking points for various relatives. The language felt carefully planned, organized, deliberate. This was not a spontaneous conversation. This was preparation. One message suggested emphasizing my age. Another suggested discussing my decision to spend time alone at Kiowa Island. Someone else proposed describing me as increasingly forgetful. The words blurred for a moment. I closed my eyes, then I opened them and continued reading. A sentence near the middle stopped me cold. If she is viewed as unable to manage financial matters, everything becomes easier. I read it twice, then a third time. Further down, another message appeared. After dinner, we present the documents and ask her to sign. The next one felt even worse. Do not give her time to contact her attorney first. I stared at the screen. There it was. Not concern, not love, not protection, control. The discussion was not about helping me. It was about gaining access to assets. My house, my finances, my future. For several minutes, I sat completely still. Images from Ryan's childhood surfaced one after another. School concerts, baseball games, college graduation. The first home he purchased, the day he introduced Vanessa to me. I remembered defending him when others criticized him. I remembered writing checks when times were difficult. I remembered believing that family loyalty moved in both directions. Apparently, I had been wrong. My hands began moving before my thoughts caught up. I captured screenshots, every page, every email, every name. Then I saved copies to my computer and forwarded them to a private email account. Years of business ownership had taught me a simple lesson. Evidence disappears when people realize you have seen it. 10 minutes later, the document vanished from the family chat. Vanessa posted another message claiming she had sent the wrong file by mistake. The explanation might have worked if I had not already read everything, but I had, and there was no unseeing it. That evening, I lit a fire and opened an old family photo album. The photographs showed birthdays, vacations, and Christmas mornings stretching back decades. Ryan smiled from nearly every page. The pain surprised me, not because strangers had betrayed me, because my son had. By the time the fire burned low, something inside me had changed. I was still hurt, still shocked, but I was no longer simply reacting. I was preparing. I created a folder on my computer. I named it Before Thanksgiving. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted completely, attorney Daniel Brooks. The next morning, he would reveal a secret Thomas had left behind years earlier, and that secret would change everything. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. I left Kiowa Island shortly after sunrise and drove toward Charleston with a folder of documents resting on the passenger seat beside me. The ocean disappeared in my rearview mirror while a different kind of storm gathered in my thoughts. Inside the folder were copies of everything I had discovered over the previous 2 days. Ryan's Thanksgiving plans, the event booking, the records connected to Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company. Most important of all, the email chain Vanessa had accidentally shared with the entire family. By the time I parked outside Daniel Brooks' office, I felt exhausted but strangely focused. Daniel had been part of our lives for more than 30 years. He was not simply my attorney. He had been Thomas's closest friend since college. Few people knew our family history better than he did. His expression changed the moment he saw the documents. For nearly an hour, I walked him through everything: the text message, the phone call from the event company, the business registration connected to my address. Finally, I handed him the printed copies of the email chain. Daniel read every page without interruption. The deeper he went, the more serious his expression became. When he finally looked up, his answer was direct. Legally, Ryan had no ownership rights to the Ashley River property. The house remained entirely mine. Every public record confirmed it. That should have been reassuring. Instead, another question troubled me. What if they succeeded in convincing people that I could no longer manage my affairs? Daniel leaned back in his chair. If a court ever declared me incapable of handling financial decisions, someone could potentially petition for control over parts of my estate. Such cases required evidence and legal review, but the possibility existed. The realization made my stomach tighten. Ryan and Vanessa had not stumbled into this situation by accident. They had researched it, planned it, prepared for it. For several seconds, silence filled the office. Then Daniel stood and crossed the room to a locked cabinet. He removed an old file box and carried it to the conference table. I recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately. A wave of emotion hit me before Daniel said a single word. Carefully, he opened the folder. Inside was a trust document I had not seen in years. Harper Family Protection Trust. The name sounded familiar, but only vaguely. I remembered signing estate planning papers with Thomas long ago. At the time, I trusted him completely and paid little attention to the details. Daniel slid the document toward me. Then he explained what Thomas had built. The trust contained a protective clause, unlike anything I expected. If any beneficiary attempted fraud, coercion, manipulation, or financial exploitation against me, that person would automatically lose inheritance rights connected to the trust. Those rights would immediately transfer to the next generation. In our family, that meant Sophie and Noah. For a moment, I could not speak. Thomas had prepared for a possibility I never imagined. Perhaps he understood people better than I did. Perhaps he understood love better, too. Daniel pointed towards several sections of the document. The evidence already in my possession could potentially trigger the protection clause. The emails mattered. The planning mattered. The attempt itself mattered. For the first time all week, I felt something stronger than fear. Security. I was not standing alone. Daniel recommended immediate legal action. We could cancel Thanksgiving, send notices, and confront Ryan directly. I considered it carefully. Then I thought about Sophie and Noah. I thought about the relatives who still believed lies. Most of all, I thought about the truth. The truth deserved witnesses. I decided I would attend Thanksgiving exactly as planned, but I would not arrive as a victim. I would arrive prepared. Daniel studied me for a long moment before nodding. He understood. The woman who had spent years making room for everyone else was finally drawing a line. As I placed my hand on Thomas's trust documents, a calm certainty settled inside me. The game Ryan thought he was controlling had just changed. I left Daniel Brooks's office carrying far more than a folder of legal documents. For the first time since Ryan's text message appeared on my phone, I carried certainty. The drive back to Kiowa Island felt different from the drive into Charleston that morning. The facts were no longer scattered pieces of a puzzle. They had formed a picture, and it was not a picture I enjoyed looking at. Ryan and Vanessa had planned this. The emails proved it. The discussions proved it. The preparations proved it. The hardest part was realizing that the house was not what hurt the most. I had spent decades building businesses. I understood contracts, assets, and ownership. Property could be protected. Money could be replaced. Trust was different. Trust took years to build and seconds to break. As I crossed the bridge toward the island, I found myself thinking about Thomas. He had always been the cautious one in our marriage. I was the optimist. He was the strategist. Whenever we faced a difficult situation, he looked beyond the immediate problem and searched for what lay underneath it. One phrase he used to repeat came back to me that afternoon. The most dangerous lies are the ones people rehearse together. At the time, I thought he was talking about business negotiations. Now I understood he had been talking about human nature. That evening, I spread every document across my dining room table. The screenshots from Vanessa's email, the records connected to Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company, the property records, the trust documents Daniel had shown me. I organized everything into folders and made multiple copies. One set remained on my computer. Another went onto an external drive. A third copy was sent securely to Daniel. If I had learned anything from years in business, it was that evidence mattered. Meanwhile, life inside the family group chat continued as though nothing had happened. Vanessa shared photographs of table decorations. Ryan discussed guest seating arrangements. Relatives exchanged recipes and travel plans. Reading the messages felt surreal. Only a handful of people knew a storm was approaching. The rest were walking toward Thanksgiving completely unaware. On Friday evening, Daniel called with an update. The trust's protection clause remained available. The evidence already pointed toward deliberate manipulation, but timing mattered. If Ryan and Vanessa moved forward publicly with their plan, their intentions would become undeniable. That conversation helped shape our strategy. We agreed that I would attend Thanksgiving exactly as expected. I would not warn anyone. I would not argue. I would not reveal what I knew. Ryan and Vanessa would be given every opportunity to expose themselves. Daniel would attend as my guest. Every document would be ready. Every fact would be organized. The plan sounded simple. Living with it was much harder. More than once, I picked up my phone intending to call Ryan. I wanted answers. I wanted to hear his voice and ask why. Why had he done this? Why had he allowed things to reach this point? Each time I put the phone back down. The son I wanted to talk to no longer existed in the way I remembered him. The man involved in those emails would not suddenly tell the truth because I asked. Late Saturday afternoon, Ryan sent me a private message. The tone was warm, friendly, almost affectionate. He asked how I was feeling. He said everyone was excited to see me. He hoped I was enjoying the island. I read the message several times. Once, those words would have comforted me. Now they felt strangely empty. For the first time, I clearly saw the distance between what people said and what they did. Sunday night arrived with cold ocean winds rattling the windows. Just before bed, another message appeared from Ryan. Looking forward to Thanksgiving, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed my response. So am I. Ryan probably read those words as surrender. The truth was very different. Everything was ready, and Thanksgiving was finally approaching. Thanksgiving morning arrived bright and cold. I left Kiowa Island before sunrise and drove toward Charleston with a calmness that would have surprised me a week earlier. The anxiety that had haunted me for days was gone. In its place was certainty. On the passenger seat sat a leather folder containing every document that mattered. The emails Vanessa had accidentally exposed, the records connected to Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company, the property documents proving ownership of the Ashley River house, the Harper Family Protection Trust that Thomas had quietly prepared years before. Everything I needed was there. By the time I arrived, cars already lined the driveway. The house looked beautiful. Autumn wreaths hung from the doors. Fresh flowers decorated the entry hall. Laughter drifted through the windows. For a moment, memories hit me unexpectedly. This house had once been the center of our family. Thomas and I had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and Christmas mornings within those walls. We had built a life there. Now it felt different. Not because the house had changed, because the people inside it had. The first bright moment came when Sophie and Noah spotted me. Both children ran toward me before I had fully entered the foyer. Their hugs were genuine, warm, and uncomplicated. For a few seconds, everything else disappeared. They reminded me exactly why I was there. This was never about revenge. It was about protecting what remained good. Ryan greeted me moments later. He seemed unusually cheerful. His smile lingered a little too long. His questions sounded carefully chosen. Vanessa was equally attentive, moving through the room with effortless charm. If I had not seen the emails, I might have believed every word. Instead, I noticed details. Several relatives who had participated in the email discussions were present. They exchanged brief looks with Ryan and Vanessa throughout the afternoon. Small signals, tiny acknowledgments. The kind people use when following a shared plan. By lunchtime, all 30 guests had gathered around the long dining table. The meal itself felt almost normal. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and familiar family stories filled the room. People laughed. Children wandered in and out of conversations. Daniel Brooks sat quietly near the far end of the table. Ryan looked surprised when he arrived, but there was little he could do without drawing attention. Daniel remained silent, watching, waiting. After the main course, Ryan stood and tapped his glass. The room gradually quieted. His speech began exactly as I expected. He spoke about family, gratitude, and the importance of caring for loved ones. Vanessa followed, discussing loneliness, aging, and the challenges older people sometimes face living by themselves. Then others joined in. An aunt expressed concern. A cousin repeated a story that had clearly been exaggerated. Piece by piece, they built the same narrative. I was becoming incapable. I needed help. I needed supervision. Finally, Vanessa placed a folder on the table. Ryan slid a pen toward me. The room became very still. 30 pairs of eyes settled in my direction. This was the moment they had spent weeks preparing. Ryan began explaining how the documents would simplify property management and protect the family. I did not touch the pen. Instead, I looked at Ryan, then Vanessa, then Daniel. He gave the slightest nod. That was enough. I folded my hands calmly on the table. Then I spoke. Before anyone signs anything, I think there are a few documents everyone should see. The silence that followed was immediate. Ryan froze. Vanessa's expression changed instantly, and for the first time that day, the performance began to crack. The silence after my words felt heavier than anything that had been said all afternoon. 30 people sat around the Thanksgiving table, waiting. Ryan remained frozen beside his chair. Vanessa's hand tightened around the folder she had placed in front of me. For the first time all day, neither of them looked confident. I opened my leather case slowly. There was no reason to rush. The truth did not require urgency. Daniel Brooks rose from his seat at the far end of the table. His calm presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Several guests recognized him as our longtime family attorney. Ryan attempted to speak, but Daniel politely asked for a moment before any documents were signed. Then he began presenting facts. Nothing more, nothing less. The first documents were copies of the email chain Vanessa had accidentally shared. Several relatives received printed pages. As they read, expressions changed throughout the room. Confusion became discomfort. Discomfort became shock. The emails described plans to portray me as mentally incapable. They discussed preventing me from contacting legal counsel. They outlined strategies for obtaining control over my assets after Thanksgiving dinner. Nobody needed an explanation. The words spoke for themselves. One aunt who had participated in the discussions looked down at her lap. A cousin who had clearly been told only part of the story appeared genuinely stunned. Ryan insisted the family had simply been concerned about my well-being, but concern and planning are not the same thing. The distinction was becoming obvious to everyone. Daniel then placed another document in the center of the table. The property records. He explained that the Ashley River house remained solely owned by Evelyn Harper. Every tax payment, every insurance policy, every ownership record, all in my name. A murmur moved around the room. Several guests looked surprised. Apparently, many had assumed Ryan owned the property. Ryan's face tightened. The foundation beneath his story was beginning to crack. Then Daniel introduced the next file. Harper Coastal Development Limited Liability Company. The room grew quieter. He explained that the business had been registered using my address without my authorization. Financial obligations connected to the company remained unresolved. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. But Daniel was not finished. The final documents hit harder than everything that came before. Records showed that official correspondence connected to federal tax inquiries had been redirected through my property address. Letters, notices, financial communications, all connected to Ryan's business affairs. The evidence was detailed and documented. No speculation, no accusations, just facts. Vanessa began crying quietly. Nobody reacted, not because people lacked compassion, because the truth had become impossible to ignore. Daniel reached for one final folder. The Harper Family Protection Trust. He explained its purpose and the protection clause Thomas had included years earlier. The room listened in complete silence. If any beneficiary attempted manipulation, coercion, or financial exploitation against me, that individual would lose inheritance rights connected to the trust. The benefits would transfer directly to the next generation. Sophie and Noah. The words seemed to drain the remaining color from Ryan's face. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. After a long moment, I finally broke the silence. I spent years protecting my family. I never imagined I would need protection from my family. The sentence settled over the room. No one challenged it. No one defended what had happened. Ryan stared at the table. Vanessa wiped tears from her face. And for the first time in many years, I sat perfectly straight in my own chair, no longer feeling obligated to apologize for protecting myself. The consequences had finally begun. If you're still watching and believe actions eventually reveal a person's true character, comment number 8 below. The truth is finally out, but the real consequences are only beginning. Let's move on to the conclusion of this story. The Thanksgiving gathering ended far differently than anyone had expected. Conversations became quiet. Guests left earlier than planned. Small groups stood in corners speaking in low voices, while others avoided eye contact altogether. The warm holiday atmosphere that Ryan and Vanessa had carefully constructed disappeared beneath the weight of the truth. I left the house with Daniel Brooks shortly after the confrontation ended. There was nothing left to say. The documents had spoken clearly enough. During the drive back toward Kiowa Island, exhaustion settled over me. For days I had carried fear, disappointment, and uncertainty. Now those emotions had been replaced by something simpler. Relief. Not happiness, not victory, relief. The truth was finally out in the open. Over the following week, my phone rang constantly. Several relatives called to apologize. Some admitted they had believed Ryan's version of events. Others confessed they had never seen the full email chain and had assumed the discussion was genuinely about my well-being. I listened politely. I accepted their apologies. But for the first time in my life, I did not rush to make everyone feel better. People were responsible for their own choices. That lesson had taken me 67 years to learn. Ryan called more than anyone else. The messages came regularly. Voicemails, emails, text messages, each one focused on pressure, stress, financial problems, and responsibilities. He explained, he justified, he defended. What he never truly did was apologize. A real apology accepts responsibility. Ryan seemed more interested in explaining why things happened than acknowledging that they should never have happened at all. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, the legal process reached its final stage. Ryan and Vanessa moved out of the Ashley River house. There were no successful challenges, no legal victories, no last-minute solutions. The facts were simply too clear. I chose not to be there on moving day. Instead, I remained at Kiowa Island, watching the winter waves roll toward shore. One evening, Sophie called. Her voice sounded hesitant. After a few minutes of conversation, she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. She wanted to know whether I still loved her father. For several seconds, I could not answer. Then I told her the truth. Love and trust are not always the same thing. I still loved Ryan because he was my son, but love could not erase what had happened. That conversation became the first real step toward healing. Early in December, Daniel called with the final confirmation. The Harper Family Protection Trust had been fully updated and secured. The future beneficiaries were Sophie and Noah. The process was complete. That morning, I stood by the window overlooking the Atlantic Ocean and watched sunlight spread across the water. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer felt guilty for protecting myself. And that changed everything. A year after that Thanksgiving, I sat on the porch of my house on Kiowa Island, watching the morning sun rise over the Atlantic Ocean. Life was quieter now. The legal meetings were over. The endless documents were gone. The tension that had once followed me from room to room had slowly faded into memory. Ryan and I still spoke occasionally. Our conversations were polite, careful, and brief. The closeness we once shared never fully returned, but neither of us pretended the past had not happened. Vanessa rarely appeared at family gatherings anymore. Sophie and Noah, however, remained a steady presence in my life. They visited often. We cooked together, walked along the beach, and spent weekends talking about school, dreams, and the future. Those simple moments reminded me of something important. The greatest treasures I possessed had never been my house, my savings, or my investments. They were the relationships built on honesty. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant constant sacrifice. I believed love required endless patience and unlimited access. I thought saying no was selfish. At 67, I finally learned a different lesson. Boundaries do not destroy families. People who refuse to respect boundaries are the ones who damage families. I no longer felt guilty for protecting myself. I no longer believed that keeping the peace required surrendering my own well-being. What brought me peace was not Ryan losing his inheritance. It was knowing I had finally been honest with myself. I stopped pretending everything was fine simply because I wanted everyone else to be comfortable. One afternoon, Sophie and Noah visited the island again. Their laughter filled the house while I stood by the window looking toward the ocean. I thought about Thomas. I thought about the trust he had created and the protection he had quietly left behind. A smile crossed my face, not because life was perfect, but because it was finally honest. At 67, I learned that loving your family does not require surrendering yourself. And sometimes, protecting your peace is the most loving thing you can do. Sometimes life teaches its most important lessons through disappointment. We spend years believing that love means endless sacrifice, that keeping the peace is always the right choice, and that kindness alone can protect the things that matter most. Yet true wisdom often arrives when we learn that love and boundaries can exist together. Respect, trust, and honesty are the foundations of every meaningful relationship, and without them, even the strongest bonds can begin to weaken. There comes a time when protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, but an act of self-respect. The people who truly value you will never ask you to surrender your dignity in exchange for their approval. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stand firm and honor their own worth. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more heartfelt stories and life lessons. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who truly care for you.